Welcome to Rewired Sober, the podcast that breaks down the real reasons women turn to alcohol. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a character flaw. It was your neurobiology, your conditioning, and the systems that taught women to silence themselves instead of support themselves. I'm your host, Kate Vitella. I've been a registered nurse for well over 2 decades, trained in addiction and mental health, a bit neuroscience obsessed, but spiritually grounded. This is the science and soul work of a woman's recovery, where I help you understand what's happening in your sober brain and reconnect to that deeper inner truth you've always had, that soul level knowing, the intuition the patriarchy has tried to train out of you. When women combine the science of the brain rewiring with that inner knowing, you stop feeling broken and you start feeling powerful. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Rewired Sober. I feel like I just said, welcome back. It's just me on the mic. Be prepared for some goofiness, because for some reason, whenever I do this alone, I just get weird. I don't know. It's harder than it looks to talk to yourself for 45 minutes and keep it in some kind of cohesive structure without, especially someone like me who lives on humor, without cracking so many jokes and no one's listening. No one's in the room with me. No one's laughing back. And so, I find that I get a little bit weird on these solo episodes. However, I love doing them because I have a lot to say, and really, I'm so passionate about getting my message out there. It's just, it can be tricky when you're sitting alone, spitting all over your microphone. I'm staring down a bowl of popcorn right now that is waiting for me. So as soon as I am done here, I get to devour the popcorn and watch fashion YouTube and plan some outfits for New York. So that's my motivation to keep going here. Okay, what are we talking about today? This is going to be probably my biggest ramble yet, and that says a lot coming from me, considering that I've rambled in 50-something episodes. But I really want to talk about spirituality and my soul journey, and I guess some religious healing, which I didn't even have the words for until recently. I've had such a hard time putting this whole thing into words. I briefly touched on around the year 6 to 7 of sobriety. I did a lot of spiritual studies, and I looked into Buddhism, and I looked into various aspects of Catholicism, and I looked into yoga and Indian traditions, and I looked into Judaism. And really what I came to was that I just had to learn to trust myself again, and I had some religious healing to do. And I've shared pieces of that on this podcast, and essentially coming across feminist theologians, especially Megan Watterson, I would say Cynthia Bourgeault, Karen King, they've really helped me to reclaim a relationship with my inner voice after leaving structured patriarchal religion. And I didn't realize how much sort of damage that had done. And the work mattered so much for me because it helped me trust myself again. And when I talk about trusting your knowing, your soul journey in my coaching programs, I mean developing the ability to recognize what feels internally congruent versus what feels performative or fear-driven, and to make decisions from that place. So on this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about spirituality and religion, but know that when I'm working within my group coaching container, it can be any way that you come to know your own soul voice. It doesn't have to be mystical, right? It's the part of you that becomes accessible when your nervous system feels safe enough to hear yourself think. And I find that spiritual language can be helpful because it points to meaning and values and coherence. But the function is essentially the same if you call it your intuition, your inner authority, your soul voice, your values, or even if you use the term discernment. That's one of my favorite terms. It's about learning how to listen inward instead of outsourcing your decisions to fear or approval or old rules. And so when I say you're going to learn to trust yourself and trust your own knowing, it's not something that you're just going to flip a switch and decide to do. It's something that's going to emerge for you through safety and lived experience and repetition. And you're going to stay with yourself on this journey. And if parts of this are religious or spiritual, or they include rituals of some kind, chanting, yoga, breath work, prayer, whatever, that's up to you. I'm not here to tell you how to embark on your own spiritual journey. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But as time has gone on, I've found that what really brings me joy in the coaching space is not so much focusing on early sobriety as in how to quit drinking, right? Put down the drink, crush the cravings, all that kind of stuff. There are so many excellent coaches out there on the internet right now who can walk you through the FOMO and the first 90 days and the cravings and make this mocktail and do this instead of that and join this club. And I've found over time, not so much that my work is deeper, but in a sense, it's on another level. It's beyond that. In the way that I sum it up is sort of like, you're sober, now what? Right? You put the alcohol down maybe a couple weeks ago, a couple of years ago, depending on your recovery, your drinking habits. And now you're kind of wondering, what's next? And how do I get to know myself now? How do I move forward instead of just managing myself? So I'm opening a new space and it's available now, but really it's not so much about becoming more spiritual, it's just about becoming more internally aligned. And I really want to encourage people, women, to come in, like I said, at 2 weeks or 2 years, because early sobriety is different for different people depending on your drinking. Early sobriety for me looked like 2 years because I drank every day and I had a very strong addiction to the substance of alcohol. And I had a lot of physical detox to go through and just a lot of mess. But I've worked with women who are sober for 2 weeks to 2 months, and they're at a much different place than I was. So really, early sobriety is however you define it. I want to talk about something that it's been so important in my recovery, but it's hard to articulate. And I've been calling it soul work. Not in a religious way, but kind of for me. Not in a woo-woo way, but kind of for me. So here I am, clear as mud. And I guess your soul work is kind of like choose your own adventure. And for me, it's do whatever resonates for you as long as it's not performative, as long as it's grounded and human. And so much of my recovery wasn't just about behavior change. As much as I love neuroscience and atomic habits, it was also about rebuilding my relationship with myself. And a big part of that meant untangling some really deep, conditioned areas around self-trust and authority and worth and identity. And honestly, a lot of that conditioning came from spirituality. It came from religion. It came from organized religion. So I didn't really realize this for a long time, but I had what I now understand as religious wounding. Not in the traumatic, extreme way. You know, I hear people say they're recovering Catholics. I didn't have it that way. It's not a dramatic story, but it was just sort of a slow, quiet messaging that taught me in organized religion that I couldn't fully trust myself, that I was flawed. I needed to be fixed, to be saved, and I was taught love had to be earned. And there was some authority that lived outside of me, that being obedient and good was more valued than honesty, and I feel like I was also taught that questioning it was dangerous. And I've felt sort of like my body's betrayed me in a sense, that it was suspicious, that I wasn't good. My own intuition was unreliable, and part of it's the way I grew up. I grew up in a pretty traditional Christian home. And I think my parents did the very best they could with this, but it's such a tricky subject. And to me, I didn't take home the message from organized religion that I was already enough. I didn't take the message home from church that I was already connected to the divine, or that my inner voice mattered at all, or that I could trust myself. And instead, the message that I took home from the church was always like, be better, pray more, submit, right? Don't question, don't challenge, don't trust your knowing. And when you internalize that as a young person, you don't even realize it's shaping you. It just becomes sort of your operating system. So I did what a lot of women do. I started outsourcing my discernment and my intuition and my self-worth. And I learned to look outside of myself for approval, for direction and safety, certainly for validation. And when you live like that long enough, you lose your relationship with yourself, because you stop knowing what you even feel or want. I stopped knowing what was true for me versus what I had been told was true. And honestly, this kind of disconnection is not limited to spirituality. It bleeds into everything in your life. And that's why I'm so big on talking about feminism and the patriarchy. This disconnection bleeds into our boundaries and our relationships and our identity and our coping skills. Because when you don't trust yourself internally, you start seeking regulation externally. And that is not coincidentally the perfect environment for a breeding ground for shame, for people pleasing, for perfectionism. And I've said all this. It's a perfect breeding ground for coping behaviors like drinking. So alcohol didn't just numb things for me. It gave me some temporary relief from this sort of chronic self-doubt that I had been raised with. Some of it was religious, some of it was familial, patriarchal, societal, friend groups. Of course, alcohol quieted my mind and it gave me a break from overthinking, but it also gave me a sense of ease I didn't really know how to access on my own. And when I started in recovery, as I've said many times, I started in the rooms of AA. And when I went into a different direction and decided to go to different meetings and start studying addiction myself, I leaned hard into neuroscience. And that was part of me rebelling. I was rebelling against the dogma, against the 12-step language, and being told that I had to see myself as diseased and broken, right? If I leaned into neuroscience, I'm rebelling against, anything that felt like another system trying to define me, right? I could lean in to the neuroscience. A lot of it was just trying to find my way in, but I went all the way in on brain science, neuroplasticity, habit loops. I must have read Atomic Habits like 10 times, right? Talking a lot about the nervous system and dopamine and trauma. And while I still talk about those things, there's a softer side that I like to talk about as well. Because all that, talking about that is great. It feels really safe. It's clean. I'm passionate about it. But there's also this piece that's a little bit more soulful. And honestly, that phase was important. And the other day, I had a woman set up a call with me. Actually, I hope she's listening to this right now because this is my mea culpa. And she said, "What do you mean by soul work?" And it was like spit, sputter, say really stupid things, not articulate your words. And when I got off the call with her, I was like, oh my God, I just totally botched that call. She probably thinks I'm completely incompetent, because I realized at the time I hadn't quite put into words what it was I was trying to articulate. And I was kind of wavering on, should I talk about spirituality? Should I talk about religion? Or should I just talk about habits and intuition? And as I'll get to, I came to know that it's all okay. And so I've been sitting with this and, of course, realizing the science alone wasn't enough. Women were bringing to me things that weren't just neuroscience, that weren't just behavioral, weren't just neurological. There was a lot of emotions. Over time, I've coached tons of women, and it's very emotional. It's relational. It is sort of spiritual on an identity level. And there's been real grief and sadness and longing and heartbreak and all the things. And so I really wanted to talk about this soul work that I keep describing and what it means to me. And there are pieces of it that are a little religious and spiritual. And then there are pieces of it that are just straight up, no bullshit, feminist intuition. And you can pick the parts that resonate with you. Quick pause here, folks. If you're liking this content, did you know that I go live once a week in a group coaching setting? The Rewired Sober Now What is a 3-month integration program. I would love to meet you live and let's talk about all the things. If you've stopped drinking and you're quietly thinking, okay, well, now what? This might be for you. It's for women only who are already sober. Now, this can be anywhere from a few weeks to a couple years. You put down the drink and you want more than just not drinking. This isn't one of your typical quit alcohol programs. It's not about willpower, rules, or starting over. It's about integration. We focus on stabilizing your nervous system, understanding what's actually happening in your brain in sobriety, and doing the grounded inner work that helps you trust yourself again, emotionally, relationally, and day to day. So if you're sober, you're still feeling a little unsettled, maybe your emotions are louder than you expected, or maybe you're just unsure how to grow into this version of yourself without white knuckling or performative sobriety. That's your now what moment. And that's exactly what this phase in the program is built for. And I would love to meet you live. You can learn more at the link in the show notes or head on over to Rewired Sober social media and you'll see link in the bio there. Now back to the show. But going back to like organized religion, there was real wounding from that, from patriarchal structures, and always taught to be good and small and not to trust myself. And I realized over time, I was also carrying a lot of anger. I carried anger and it was actually grief, and it was a bit of heartbreak. I was so quick to anger, and anger felt like the easiest emotion to go to. But there was a layer of sadness under there and a layer of unexpressed pain and years of sort of like just swallowing it. And when I say I softened, I really didn't know how to access that pain until I was able to soften around it and do some soul work, right? Until I stopped trying to be all logic, all neuroscience, and no soul. And I really started listening to the parts of myself that were quieter, deeper, and more emotional and intuitive. And that's when I really started connecting to what I call my divine feminine. Now, before you throw up, I know that that word has been used all over the internet. And in fact, I have a tattoo that says divine feminine because it really means something important to me now that I've made it my own. Because it's not in an aesthetic way or a branding way. It's more for me about permission to feel. permission to be feminine, to be more emotional, and to be fucking complex as a woman. Permission to be both wise and messy at the same time. I've kind of called that entering into my divine feminine era, and that's where the soul work of a woman's recovery comes in for me. And I've also talked about Megan Watterson, and she's a feminist theologian, and I've had a really hard time explaining how important she is to me. But going back to this divine feminine concept and the permission to be both complex and messy and emotional, and also divine as well. When I first read Megan Watterson's work, what hit me the hardest was she talks about the Greek word anthropos, which means to be both fully human and fully divine. And to me, that is my divine feminine, that I can be both neuroscience and soul. Because I remember hearing that and thinking, like, wait, what? I get to be human? Like, it's okay to be emotional and messy and contradictory, right? It's okay to be evolving and healing and like always in a process. And I don't have to pick one version. And I think that's what I'm trying to hit home here is when it comes to your soul's journey, it doesn't have to be any one way. It can be whatever resonates with you. It doesn't have to be either spiritual, religious, or mystical, but it also can be all that. Because honestly, I feel like my real life looks like, sometimes I'm reading neuroscience research, and sometimes I'm crying in front of my coach, or sometimes I'm pulling a divine feminine oracle card from Megan Watterson's deck, or I'm reading Atomic Habits, or I'm flipping through Vogue, right? Like, I'm a human, I'm multifaceted and complex, and I'm allowed to be grounded at some points and regulated, and then also a messy, emotional, like raw, divine human. And for a long time, I thought that all of that meant that I was so inconsistent and I couldn't get the messaging right and I was too much and all over the place. But I'm coming to understand it now as something different. And it's not so much inconsistency as it is just integrating. And that's what I'm calling my new program. It's You're Sober, Now What? And like, let's integrate to what it looks like to be fully human. And so another piece that sort of deeply shifted me when I talk about Megan Watterson was learning the real history of Mary Magdalene. Now, this is a bit religious, but like I said, I was raised Christian, and I was raised very traditional Christian. Like, God is a white man who lives in the sky and you pray to him. He uses he, him pronouns. You confess for your sins, all these things. And I was confirmed Catholic, but over time, my family didn't go to Catholic church or mass as much as they did non-denominational Christian church. However, there was still a lot of dogma. So when I'm learning about Megan Watterson, and she's been on a lot of podcasts lately because she just came out with a new book. So I highly encourage you to look up her work. She's written several books, Reveal, Mary Magdalene Revealed, and then The Woman Who Baptized Herself. And it's so enlightening to have a woman break down all this stuff for you and include parts of history, parts of the Bible that were left out, and parts of the story that were left out. For me, this was super healing religiously, because all of that old wounding of you're not good enough, and you certainly have to look to a hierarchical male structure to be closer to God and all that, it just made me want to puke. And you add that in with AA and all the dogma and shit. I'm getting way off topic. Let's go back to Mary Magdalene. Okay, Megan Watterson talks about this, and not in the caricature way of her. She was very minimized in the Bible. Spoiler alert, she was never a prostitute, but she was a teacher and mystic and a leader. And the first witness to the resurrection and the one entrusted with the message. Often Mary was called the apostle to the apostles. And hearing this really healed my soul after a lifetime of not really fully getting to hear the truth about Christianity. When I learned her story had been erased, Mary's story, it had been erased and distorted over time because powerful women are threatening. We know that. Something shifted in my whole being. It was like I equated the story of Mary Magdalene to my entire recovery. Like all of it was interconnected because it is. Suddenly, I wasn't hearing a story about a fallen woman. I was hearing a story about a woman whose wisdom was suppressed. And that deeply resonated with me. Like that felt hella fucking familiar. So in some ways, reclaiming the story of Mary Magdalene helped me reclaim something in myself. And that is religious healing 101, folks, for me anyway. It really helped me trust my voice and honor my intuition, and helped me see that I have feminine wisdom that is sacred. It's not secondary. And it began to shift everything for me. And I come to this mic really confident with good boundaries. And, I talk about being a badass, but it took this type of healing for me to get here, for me to shift that in my confidence, in my relationships, in my identity. And it really had to go back to my core relationship with the God of my understanding, because my entire life I thought something different. And once I really wrapped my head around Megan Watterson's voice and the fact that she refers to God as the good, and that we all have the good inside of us. We are all connected to the good in a non-gendered entity. Our souls are all connected. It's just shifted so much for me, because when you stop believing that you're inherently broken or that love has to be earned, and when you stop outsourcing your worth to authority, to religious authority, you stop abandoning yourself, right? And when you stop abandoning yourself, you don't fucking need to numb with alcohol in the same ways. So all of it was interconnected. And that's where the science and the soul actually meet. What I'm trying to say here is that all of this work interconnected for me, and I hope it does for you in some ways. But I'm not trying to tell you how. I'm not a theologian. Wait, is that how you say it? Theologian. I'm certainly not that. But, I like to talk about the interconnection of the science and soul work of a woman's recovery, right? The science being very clear-cut how the brain rewires after alcohol, why emotions tend to feel louder in early sobriety, post-acute withdrawal, and how stress and habit loops sort of work out. And, the basics of why willpower burns people out, stuff like that. That matters. That's real. But there's also this other part, the soul work of women's recovery, learning how to feel without numbing and rebuilding self-trust, whatever that looks like with yourself, rebuilding self-trust after years of religious trauma, patriarchal trauma, AA trauma, dogma, whatever, right? Rebuilding that after years of overriding it. And maybe even parts of you get to grieve what alcohol gave you, because it certainly gave you something. It gave you an escape, and it's okay to grieve that without romanticizing it. And, soul work is also letting go of fucking performing sobriety correctly, of integrating it into your identity in your daily life. Like in a more lived healing sense. Because you can understand neuroplasticity intellectually all day long. But if you're still disconnected from yourself spiritually or in your soul, the healing won't really stick as much. And neuroscience and feminism, spirituality, recovery, to me, they're all pointing to the same truth. And that is, your internal experience matters. Your body carries wisdom. And disconnection from the self, it will fuel the suffering. And so the goal is to reconnect with the self, whatever that looks like. one of Megan Watterson's teachings in her book Reveal that really tied this all in for me. She talks about, there's a time when your voice of truth is the only one you can hear. And I think some of this is directly quoted out of Reveal, but I'm actually reading you this right out of my journal, whereas I often quote books verbatim. So not trying to steal her work here, but I think parts of the book say the voice of truth is within you. And to me, I wrote, I've been too scared to listen to it or to hear it, or much less to follow it. But for myself, I wrote, only love is real. That's a tattoo I have on my arm. I listen to my soul's voice. And that's my divine work. That is my spiritual work. Megan Watterson writes, connect to the unassuming voice of the truth inside you. And be courageous about it. It takes audacity to listen to that. Like we've been taught it's our ego and it's not good. And she writes in question, are you hearing the voice of love within you? And the practice of loving ourselves means we do whatever we have to do to hear our own soul's voice and believe it. We believe it so much, we make our life about that encounter. And I'm going to say that again. We believe our soul voice so much. We believe in loving ourselves. We do whatever it takes to hear our own soul voice. We make our life about that encounter. Now that is not a quote you hear on a coffee mug. That's some real fucking shit. And that rocked me. And when I talk about soul work and the healing that women need to do in order to feel free, it's about aligning with love toward yourself to where you feel clear. It's about stopping the people pleasing and the performing and abandoning yourself, because you're going to do whatever it takes. Do whatever spiritual practice you have to do to get there, right? Whether it's religious or it's tarot cards or it's hula hooping and drinking pickle juice. Megan Watterson says, do whatever spiritual practice you have to do to forge a meeting, to broker a meeting with your soul voice, and let it expand you and settle you and connect you and regulate you and strengthen you. And that is what I mean by soul work. And I hope that that puts it into some kind of context here. I often return to readings by Marguerite Porete and A Course in Miracles. And I'm really fond of the saying, only love is real. Not in a cheesy ass Instagram quote way, but more in a grounded way. Fear contracts you and shame fragments you and beats you to shit and self-betrayal dysregulates you. But only love is real. Like, that stuff feels real, but it's temporary. And love is at the bottom of all of it. Love expands you and settles you and connects you. And I guess that's what I mean by returning to our soul voice and doing soul work. So much of our recovery has to be well beyond the stopping drinking. Like I said, there are plenty of coaches out there that coach on that and that are awesome at it. But I want to take it a next step further. And if you're interested, let's do this together. Join my group, because it's about unlearning self-betrayal and rebuilding self-trust. And whatever you have to do to get there depends on the intersection of how you came to recovery. Were you raised Catholic? Were you raised Buddhist? Is your family Jewish? Were you shamed religiously? Do you have zero affiliation religiously? I know a coach who is an atheist. She told me she thinks the Bible is Harry Potter. If that's how you come to recovery, then you're going to learn to listen to your soul voice in a different way. And it doesn't have to be about a God outside of you. In fact, your soul voice is your connection to the divine. It doesn't necessarily mean it's outside of you at all. In fact, mine isn't, right? And it was more about becoming internally anchored instead of externally governed. I don't look outside of myself now. And this work, I feel like, made me so much more grounded and embodied. And I kind of hate that word because it's like every coach's cheesy ass word. But to bring it back to something I guess in terms of religion, from my healing, it didn't pull me away from God. It actually brought me closer, not in an organized religious sense, but closer to myself and closer to God, because God is inside of me. And because for the first time, I wasn't trying to disappear to belong. I wasn't performing. I was just trying to really learn how to listen to my soul voice, connect with the good, as Megan Watterson says, and connect to that divine voice. And it's been really healing. Now, very difficult to explain all this, right? It's so hard to put this in words. But I feel like, women don't struggle in sobriety because they lack discipline. They struggle because no one really taught them how to integrate all this, how to integrate neurologically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, and integrate all that change together. And I think it's really important at Rewired Sober that we're combining the neuroscience, right? How the brain and nervous system change in sobriety with this type of soul work. And this is where I'm starting to kind of repeat myself. But if I bring it back to why the dogma in AA struck a chord. I mean, some people will say the God part of AA got them. That wasn't it for me. It wasn't the God thing. Truthfully, I was raised a Christian. I was like, my thought was actually, well, I've already been baptized, confirmed, dunked in the water, baptized by the fire. I've done all the things, and it didn't get me sober. So, not really sure what they're talking about, but okay, fine, God. But this work reconnected to me spiritually to what I know God is. God is the good in me. And when I hear about God in the old traditional sense in the rooms of AA, it just, for me, perpetuates the dogma. It perpetuates that patriarchal structure, like you get to God through a man, and there are men above you, and there are men that know, they have all the answers, the men and the stories in the Bible, and you're Mary and you're just a whore. It just perpetuated all of that for me. And somehow lately, if you add the Christian nationalism that's going on in the world and the patriarchal structures that make me want to fucking vomit, and the way geopolitically things are shaping up, I cannot sit in an organized religion. I cannot sit in the rooms of AA. I just can't any longer, because I have to connect to my soul voice, and I cannot get there through someone else. I am not going to outsource my connection with the divine through a man. Another great quote that I love here is by Sue Monk Kidd, and she says, "The ultimate authority of my life is not the Bible. It's not confined between the covers of a book. It's not from a source outside myself. My ultimate authority is the divine voice in my own soul. Period. It's not something written by men, frozen in time." And again, that to me was a game changer. The big book of AA was written by men and frozen in time, just like the fucking Bible, and all of it felt all too familiar. One more area where I was told to shut up and sit down and listen. But what I really needed to do was listen to myself, and I hope that I encourage that in other women. And if I have to be your permission slip, like that bad bitch that sits behind the computer and says, fuck them, I will. Because I know it's scary and uncomfortable at first. We want to be good. We want to do good. We don't want to upset anybody. But you know what I needed? I needed someone to give me permission. And that's what I hope I'm giving you. So if this lit a spark under your ass, let's do this together. Get into the program. I'd love to see you live. We meet weekly on Zoom, and then there's a lot of curriculum for you to ingest at your own time, and you choose your own adventure. You choose what's relevant to you. You're a grown-ass woman. You don't need me to tell you, do this, then do that, then do this. But you find your soul voice somewhere in there, right? And you make your fucking life about that encounter. Thanks for listening. Thanks for spending this time with me. I love you all so very much, and I mean it. You can find me on all the socials at Rewired Sober. The links to join my coaching program are always in the show notes, as well as an email if you want to get in touch with the pod. So until next time.